Hello, and welcome to the Dairy News and Views podcast, a production of the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Dairy Team. Our podcast covers current educational, research, and industry tools available to produce the highest quality dairy products efficiently and effectively. Thanks for joining us today on Dairy News and Views from ISU. Today's topic is going to include taking a look at PEAQ, an easy method for how producers could determine when to take the first cutting of alfalfa, as soon dairy producers are going to be switching from planting corn and beans to getting ready for their first cutting alfalfa. So today I have with me Brian Lang, Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Field Agronomist from Northeast Iowa, as well as Fred Hall, Northwest Iowa Dairy Field Specialist. So I want to welcome and thank each of you for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Great to be here again.
Brian, we know that getting that first cutting alfalfa harvested when quality is best for the cows is going to yield benefits from both the cow side as far as milk production and getting additional cuttings down the road. So can you share with us today what the term PEAQ actually means and what are some of those steps to peak our alfalfa harvest?
Yeah, PEAQ actually stands for Predictive Equation for Alfalfa Quality. It's a relationship of alfalfa's stage of development and stem height to its relative feed value. This has been around for over 20 years now. It's got a good track record. It's incredibly easy to use to get this estimated ballpark relative feed value of the standing crop alfalfa. And as you know, spring climate varies year to year, affecting growth and development. So a specific calendar date doesn't exactly work for targeting an actual particular forage quality level. But monitoring stem height and stage of development works quite well. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the method of doing PEAQ.
What's the recommended RFV value for dairy producers as they are producing feed for their milking herd?
Yeah, producers and nutritionists, they're going to vary somewhat on what they're targeting for, like the dairy cows, but a common relative feed value number for first trimester cows and dairy calves would be about 150 relative feed value. If we're looking at stocker cattle, maybe about 135, and if you're looking at beef cattle, maybe about 120 relative feed value.
So Brian, what if my neighbor down the road has an alfalfa field that's ready to go? Can I assume that my field is going to be ready at the same time that his field is ready?
No, not really. Spring growth is different for different alfalfa fields. It can vary quite a bit. The spring growth could be influenced by variety, fertility in the field, age of stand. Maybe if the field was late cut last fall, or not cut at all, or if it was cut last year 3 times, 4 times, maybe 5 times, that all can have an impact as to how quickly we might get growth and regrowth on the alfalfa this spring. So each stand should be checked on their own, but don't be concerned about this. PEAQ is a quick method; only takes about 5 minutes to check a field.
So Brian, what actually is the procedure for PEAQ?
Well, find yourself a yardstick and call up the ISU Extension Factsheet on PEAQ, and then go out to your alfalfa field. First things first, we're going to stage the crop. So we go out to a site, just kind of a random stop at a spot that looks representative of the field, and check for buds on the top of the stems. So we're first going to stage this. If there's no buds, or maybe just a few buds, we'd still call that vegetative stage. If we commonly find 1 or more buds on the tops of the stems, that makes it bud stage. And if there's flowers out there, we just call it bloom stage. So second, we're going to measure stem height of a few of the tallest stems. So we measure from ground level to the stem tip, not actually to the extended leaf tip, just to the stem tip. And we do that for a few of those tallest stems. We take an average. And so then we look at our fact sheet of PEAQ, and we match up that plant stage and the stem height on the chart on that fact sheet, and it will give you an estimated relative feed value of the standing crop in the field. Check a couple more spots, and we have an average relative feed value for the field. But one more thing, and this is very important. What we just did is we got a PEAQ reading for the standing crop. The harvesting process is going to have some forage quality losses associated with it, probably in the neighborhood of about 20 relative feed value points. So if we want to target the harvested feed at, let's say, 150 relative feed value, we would want to look at the reading on the chart targeting 170 relative feed value. So once our stem heights get to a point to where we're getting down to, this is going to decrease over time as the plants get taller. Once that stem height gets down to where we're now seeing, let's say 170 relative feed value, I'm sure we'd be in bud stage at that time. That would be the time to start harvesting in order to target the relative feed value of 150 harvested for feed.
Brian, where can we get a PEAQ fact sheet?
Well, free from any county extension office, or you could just Google ISU Dairy Team PEAQ. So ISU Dairy Team PEAQ, ISU Dairy Team PEAQ. And that web link would take you right to a PEAQ fact sheet.
And we want to note that it's PEAQ, because if you say PEAK, it takes you different places. Where can I get an idea of the conditions across the state on average cutting times, whether I'm in Northeast Iowa or Northwest Iowa?
Well, this same website that I was sending you to, the ISU Dairy Team PEAQ, actually also has on that page a number of counties listed on the left-hand side, and we're going to have about a dozen people monitoring some fields with the PEAQ process and posting those relative feed value results as the spring progresses. And so you could view those counties at any time and kind of see what's going on in other parts of the state.
Well, thanks, Brian, for those tips on getting our first cutting alfalfa done and showing us how to monitor our fields before we would cut. So as we wrap up today, any final comments or thoughts that we need to be thinking about, conditions in the field that we should be aware of as we start to think about that first cutting alfalfa here this year?
Well, about the only other thing coming up right now on alfalfa is we do like to scout for pests, and Alfalfa Weevil is actually kind of coming up on its window of activity. It's been a rather mild winter. Alfalfa Weevil overwinters better in a mild winter. I'm not saying we're going to have a problem, because we really have not had a problem with this pest for many years. And when we do, oftentimes it's a little spotty. But that's the reason we scout. We don't just automatically assume it'd be a problem when we treat. We scout to see if there is an issue. We check for threshold, and then we treat. So what we do, we start scouting once degree days for Alfalfa Weevil get over 250, which so just some quick calculations, we're probably going to be in that window next week. So starting sometime next week would be a good time to just do a rough survey of the field. Everybody that grows alfalfa should have a sweep net. The easiest way to do the rough survey in the field is to take a sweep net out, do like 10 sweeps in a spot in the field and another spot and another spot, and see if you even caught any Alfalfa Weevil. Now, we don't use the sweep net to determine threshold. We just use this sweep net just to see if they're even out there. If they're not out there, no worries. If they're out there, then we actually have a particular procedure that we would follow to determine threshold. And so this procedure, real quick, we'd collect at random about 6 alfalfa stems from each of 5 different locations. So in other words, we're collecting about 30 alfalfa stems, basically, it's, again, random across the field. We shake these stems vigorously into a bucket to dislodge the larvae. Although some of the smaller larvae could still be tucked in between some folded leaves at the top of the plant, so you're still going to want to visually inspect those top leaves in the plant to see if there's any larvae tucked in there. And we're simply going to determine the number of larvae per 30 stems. Real quick on the thresholds, this is real rough, but on the thresholds for dairy quality alfalfa, if we're over 1 larvae per stem, we'd assume that's threshold and we would consider treating. If your target is beef quality alfalfa, we could tolerate up to 2 larvae per stem before we consider treating. But so, next week, get out your sweep net, take a quick survey, see if there's even any Alfalfa Weevil out there in the first place.
Great. Thanks for those comments, Brian. I think those will be very timely. Again, we want to thank you for being on our show today, and believe any questions that anybody would have after this episode about their alfalfa stands, or maybe questions about scouting for Alfalfa Weevil, they're more than welcome to email Brian at bjlang@iastate.edu. So again, Brian's email is bjlang@iastate.edu. So Brian and Fred, I want to thank you again for being on the show. Stay safe and well, and stay tuned for an upcoming episode of the Dairy News and Views from ISU. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or combination inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.